Have you ever felt the sting of rejection? That deep ache in your soul when you're pushed aside by the very people you thought would stand by you? Maybe it was a friend who turned their back, a family member who didn't understand you, a boss who overlooked your hard work, or even a church community that made you feel like an outsider. It's one of the most painful experiences we can go through. It leaves us questioning our worth, our purpose, and our place in the world. But what if I told you that in God's kingdom, rejection isn't the end of your story? In fact, it's often the very beginning of a new, more profound chapter. What if the moments you felt most pushed out by people were the exact moments God was preparing to pull you into something greater? Today, we're going to dive deep into this powerful truth. We'll explore 10 Bible verses that reveal how God masterfully uses the rejection of people to bring about His greatest revelations and purposes for your life. This isn't just about coping with rejection. It's about seeing it as a divine setup for your comeback. It's about understanding that when man rejects you, God is often redirecting you. So get ready, because your perspective on rejection is about to be radically transformed. Let's start with one of the most powerful examples in all of Scripture, Joseph. His story is a masterclass in God-ordained rejection. Our first verse is Genesis 50-20. Speaking to his brothers, the very ones who sold him into slavery, Joseph says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Think about that. Joseph was rejected by his own flesh and blood. They were jealous of his dreams and his father's favor. They threw him in a pit and sold him. He was then falsely accused and thrown into prison. Rejection, betrayal, injustice, he faced it all. From a human perspective, his life was ruined. But from a heavenly perspective, every single act of rejection was a necessary step on the staircase to his destiny. It was the jealousy of his brothers that got him to Egypt. It was the false accusation that landed him in a prison where he would meet Pharaoh's cupbearer. It was his time in the pit and the prison that refined his character, taught him humility, and deepened his reliance on God. Without the rejection, he never would have been in the position to save an entire nation, including the very family that cast him out. Your rejection might feel like harm, but trust that God is intending it for your good and for the good of others. Our second verse comes from the life of David, a man who knew rejection intimately. In Psalm 27-10, David declares, "Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me." Before he was a king, David was a shepherd boy, the youngest and most overlooked of his brothers. When the prophet Samuel came to anoint the next king, David wasn't even invited to the lineup. He was rejected by his own father Jesse. He was left out in the field, deemed insignificant. But God's perspective was different. God wasn't looking at the outward appearance. He was looking at the heart. That rejection by his family was a divine setup. It positioned David to be chosen by God himself, not by man's standards. Later, as king, he was hunted and rejected by Saul, his predecessor and father-in-law. He spent years on the run, living in caves. Yet, in those lonely, rejected moments, David learned to find his acceptance, his security, and his identity in God alone. He learned that even if the most foundational human relationships fail, God's embrace is constant. If you're feeling forsaken by those who should love you most, know this: the Lord is waiting to receive you, to lift you up, and to anoint you for your purpose. Let's move to our third verse, which speaks directly to the cornerstone of our faith. In 1 Peter 2-4 it says, "As you come to him, the living stone rejected by humans, but chosen by God and precious to him." This verse is talking about Jesus Christ himself, the most perfect, loving, and righteous person to ever walk the earth, was ultimately rejected by mankind. The religious leaders rejected him. The crowds who once shouted, "Hosanna," later shouted, "Crucify him," and one of his closest disciples betrayed him. Jesus endured the ultimate rejection so that we could experience the ultimate acceptance. But notice the second part of the verse, chosen by God and precious to Him. The world's rejection of Jesus did not diminish His value in God's eyes. In fact, it was through this rejection, through the cross, that God's greatest plan of salvation was accomplished. This is a profound truth for us. When you are rejected for living for Christ, for standing for truth, or for following your God-given calling, remember you are in good company. The world may not see your value, but to God, you are chosen and precious. Our fourth verse takes us to the prophet Jeremiah. In Jeremiah 1-5, God says to him, "Before I formed you in the womb I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." This was God's commission to Jeremiah, but Jeremiah's ministry was filled with constant, brutal rejection. The people wouldn't listen to his warnings. The kings and priests persecuted him. He was thrown into a muddy cistern to die. He was so lonely and rejected that he became known as the weeping prophet. But here's the revelation. Jeremiah's calling was established before anyone had a chance to reject him. His purpose was sealed in eternity, not subject to popular opinion. God knew Jeremiah would be rejected, and He called him anyway. The rejection didn't nullify his purpose, it was part of it. His job was to speak God's truth, whether people accepted it or not. Sometimes, God calls us to a path of rejection to be a voice in the wilderness, to be a signpost pointing to Him, even when they don't want to look. Your worth and your calling are not determined by people's acceptance. They were determined by God before you were even born. Our fifth verse is a powerful reminder from the Apostle Paul. In Galatians 1:10, he asks, "Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ." Paul understood that you cannot serve two masters. You cannot live for the applause of man and for the approval of God simultaneously. At some point, you will have to choose. Following Jesus will inevitably lead to moments of rejection by the world. It's a guarantee. But Paul shifts the perspective of it. He sees this rejection not as a failure, but as a confirmation of his identity as a servant of Christ. If you're never being rejected, if you're never being misunderstood, if you're never ruffling any feathers for the sake of the gospel, you might want to ask yourself who you are truly trying to please. Embrace the rejection that comes from obedience to God. It is a badge of honor, a sign that you are on the right track. Let's look at a verse of incredible comfort. Found in John 15:18, Jesus tells his disciples, "If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first." Jesus didn't sugarcoat the reality of following him. He prepared his disciples for the rejection they would face. He was essentially saying, don't take it personally. This isn't really about you. It's about me and you. When you face rejection for your faith, it's a shared experience with Christ himself. It's a form of fellowship with him in his sufferings. This shifts our perspective dramatically. Instead of feeling isolated and wounded, we can feel connected to our Savior. The world that rejected the source of all light, love, and life will naturally reject those who carry his light. See it as a confirmation that his Spirit lives in you. The rejection isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're representing him right. Our seventh verse brings us back to the Old Testament, to the story of Moses. Acts 7:35 says, "This is the same Moses they had rejected with the words, 'Who made you ruler and judge?'" He was sent to be their ruler and deliverer by God himself. Moses first tried to deliver his people in his own strength, and he was met with total rejection. "Who made you ruler and judge?" they asked. Humiliated, he fled into the desert for 40 years. That period of rejection was his training ground. In the wilderness, God stripped Moses of his self-reliance, his Egyptian identity, and his pride. He was broken down and remade into a humble shepherd. It was only after this 40-year process of refinement, through rejection, that God appeared to him in the burning bush and sent him back. And this time, God sent him. The very man who was rejected by the people was the same man sent by God to be their deliverer. Don't despise your wilderness season of rejection. It might be the very place God is preparing you to be the ruler and deliverer He has called you to be. For our 8th verse, let's turn to Psalm 118 verse 22. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This is one of the most quoted Old Testament verses in the New Testament, and for good reason. It was originally about Israel, rejected by the great empires, but chosen by God. But its ultimate fulfillment is in Jesus. He was the stone rejected by the religious builders of His day, but God made Him the cornerstone of our salvation, the most important stone in the entire structure of faith. This principle applies to you too. You might feel like a rejected stone. Maybe you've been told you don't fit in, you're not talented enough, you're not qualified. The builders of this world, the gatekeepers, the influencers, the systems may have cast you aside. But God specializes in picking up rejected stones and making them cornerstones. He loves to use the unlikely, the overlooked, and the underestimated to build His kingdom. Your rejection by man is the perfect opportunity for God to display His power and make you a cornerstone in His divine project. Our 9th verse is a word of wisdom from Proverbs 9-8. Do not rebuke mockers, or they will hate you. Rebuke the wise, and they will love you. This verse teaches us about discerning where to invest our energy. When you are carrying a message or a vision from God, not everyone will receive it. Some people, described here as mockers, will be closed off. Trying to convince them will only lead to more rejection and hatred. Rejection in this sense is a divine filter. It reveals who is truly wise and who is a mocker. It shows you who is ready to receive what God has given you and who isn't. Instead of being hurt by the rejection of the mockers, see it as God's guidance, redirecting you toward the wise. The people whose hearts are open, who will receive your rebuke, your encouragement, and your vision, and love you for it. Rejection saves you time and energy. It helps you find your tribe, the people God has actually called you to serve and run with. Finally, our 10th verse is a beautiful promise from Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. This verse is the ultimate safety net for the rejected soul. It doesn't say that all things are good. Rejection is not good. It's painful. Betrayal is not good. But the verse promises that God works in all these things, including rejection, for our ultimate good. He is a master weaver. He takes the dark, ugly threads of rejection, pain, and sorrow, and He weaves them together with the bright threads of His grace, His love, and His power. The final tapestry is something beautiful, something that could not have been created without all the different colors. Every no from a person, every closed door, every painful goodbye, God is using it all. He is working it into a plan that is far better than you could have ever imagined. Your rejection is not random. It is being redeemed for your good and His glory. So the next time you feel the sting of rejection, remember these truths. Remember Joseph, David, Jesus, and Paul. Remember that rejection is often God's redirection. It's His process of refinement. And it's His setup for a revelation of a purpose so much bigger than you. When man pushes you out, God is preparing to pull you higher. Trust the process, and trust the God who is in control of it all. Thank you for joining me today. I pray this message has brought you comfort and a new, powerful perspective. If it blessed you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. We'd love to hear your story in the comments. How has God used rejection in your life? Let's encourage one another. Until next time, stay strong in Him.
Let me know in the comment section below which verse struck you the most. And please make sure you hit the like and subscribe button.